Okay, we got a yay in response to posting the Twitch stream, so that's a good sign. And it is 5 after, so it's definitely time to get started. Glad to see everybody. We have a lot to cover again this week. I was really glad to see some community conversation this week, some suggested topics. We had kind of a couple suggested topics that came through that were also things we're talking about internally, and so I think that's going to take up the bulk of this, is going to be around kind of handling previous releases and unsupported releases. First, kind of want to update you on the timeline for this release. And we will be, tomorrow at 10 a.m. is the deadline for your PRs to be in. Those PRs need to have passing tests. If you need help or have questions about that, please reach out to myself or a team member, and we will do what we can to get you taken care of. But after tomorrow, no more PRs will be going in. Event-wise, we had a couple 2-week break from the meetups, but those are starting up again next week. Next week's meetup is actually going to be the SaltStack Germany user group. Our speaker is Elias Probst, and he's going to be talking about SaltStack between guardrails. That meetup is actually going to be in the German language, which is going to be interesting. It might be the first time we've done one in a foreign language, but for people who are interested, you can find that information on community.saltstack. YouTube uploads, I'm in the process of fixing some of those. There was an error where things weren't uploading how they were supposed to. And then I'm not sure how many people noticed it, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat, but I made some changes to the community wiki that we've been using. I relabeled the open hour notes so that they were more clear, so that they say open hour with the month and date for the month and year. And somebody had requested that we put the most recent notes at the top of that document, so I switched the May documents around so that the notes from the most recent open hour are at the top of the document. I also created an About the Salt Community open hour page that I also shared out across Slack and Google as a pinned post, but that talks about what the open hour is, why we do it, links to how to join, links to how to submit your topic. So that's all organized and in a cadence. We will be on Tuesdays. I'll be publishing the open hour agendas for the following Thursday. If you have things you'd like to cover in the open hour that don't make it into that Tuesday's agenda, still feel free to submit those, and I can add them to the following week, or if we have extra time during an open hour, we can do it then too. And if you do have a specific, we had a case this week where Sebastian had actually posted a question and through the open hour topic submission, and when he did that, since we added it to the agenda, I reached out to him and said, hey, just wanted to let you know that we're going to be covering your topic tomorrow, so that he knew that the topic he suggested was going to be part of the open hour. So I'll also do that so that you know that the topic, you don't miss the open hour after you proposed a topic. So that's everything for me. Does anybody have any open hour related questions? Okay, cool. And then we have a SEP that is closing, the one on Python version support. I think Wayne was going to elaborate on that a little bit. Is Wayne on? Wayne is not on. Okay, who wants to cover that SEP 20 on the Python version support? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can cover it, but can you come back to me in about 3 minutes?
Sure. I mean, basically it's closed. It is closing, but we want to let you know about that.
Yeah, I believe this is the Python 3 one. I just want to make sure I'm correct.
Okay. Open hour meetups. Okay, and then you ready?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So what we're saying in this SEP is that when Python ends of life's a Python version, we will also stop supporting it. So that wasn't official in the past, and we're just making that official. Where that actually, the only thing that actually affects for Sodium would be Python 3.4. So we are not supporting 3.4, which we really didn't plan on supporting 3.4 anyway. So it's basically just making our policy around that official, that when Python end of life's something, we're also not going to support it.
And I believe that only affects Debian 8, right?
Yeah.
Any questions about that? Okay. And then we have a new SEP that came out. I shared that out yesterday. It was the SEP on handling unsupported releases, moving them to a separate URL. And Bryce is going to cover that for us. He and I kind of worked on that together with a couple others, but
yeah,
Bryce, take it away.
So basically, just like Ubuntu, when they no longer support things, they move stuff to old releases.ubuntu.com, and Debian moves stuff to archive.debian.org. We're going to have a separate domain. We're thinking of archive.repo.saltstack.com. And anytime a major release goes out of support, we'll move everything related to that major release to that old or the archive.repo.saltstack.com. Also, anytime a point release is affected by a CVE, we'll also move that to the archive.repo.saltstack.com. Same with PyPy, we're going to remove those old releases to a SaltStack hosted place rather than having them on PyPy. I think that's basically it. Any questions?
So that means you're not publishing to PyPy anymore?
Supported versions will still be on PyPy, like 3000 is supported, 2019.2 is supported. Those will remain on PyPy. It's just when things are out of support, they're going to be removed from PyPy. I think Pedro has more details on what's going to happen on PyPy than I am aware of.
Yeah, the purpose behind this change is kind of us reacting to how to the CV that we had, and we are still seeing people installing older and older versions which can compromise their machines. And the idea here is to make it explicit that you want to install that version. For example, if you have a CI job that relies on an older version of Salt, you can still get it, but you will not be able to pip install it, just to make it explicit that you really want to do that. And going forward with this SEP, we will take out unsupported versions so that people are acquainted with the process. Newer releases will be on PyPy, as have always been, and we will continue doing that. We will just be taking out the unsupported ones to address any future issues that we might encounter and make it more explicit about unsupported versions and people trying to install them. That's more or less the idea here.
Cool. Sounds good.
That SEP is running on a fairly aggressive timeline because of the urgency and because of the security risks. So we made the announcement yesterday. Today it's open for discussion during this open hour, and of course, staying throughout the weekend, early next week on Slack and IRC and channels of choice. The 26th, we're closing the SEP to comments. The 27th, the SEP itself closes, and on June 1st, we'll be moving the unsupported releases to the new URL. So, like I said, a lot quicker than we would normally do a SEP, but this is urgent. It's, people are still downloading unsupported releases, and we need to avoid that as much as possible.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
You're talking about unsupported releases. Do you mean releases that are known to contain a security vulnerability, or all releases that you don't plan to add a new version? That's not exactly the same, and maybe you can you want to get an older release, but you don't want a release with a security vulnerability.
So I can explain on that. The idea going forward, so SaltStack has a few number of supported releases going back. We will maintain those on PyPI unless they are hit by a CVE. In that case, depending on the version, we will submit a release just to address the CVE issue, and we will remove the affected version from PyPI. But going forward, those versions, let's say that we release Sodium, and in a couple of months, 2019.2 goes out of support. That will be taken out of PyPI. So to answer your question, everything that is not in the supported versions of Salt will be taken out of PyPI.
So all the point releases of the major releases that are supported will be up, except ones hit by CVEs. So currently that's 2019.2, 3000. All of the point releases of those will remain, except those hit by CVEs.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions about that SEP at the moment? I did see some people had already commented on it. Thank you for that feedback. Doesn't seem like, seems like everybody kind of understands what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. So that's good to know. All right, cool. Well, in that case, we're going to move into, we had a feedback item of the week this week. It was semi-related, but it's a CVE about within the SALT RC packages. And David Murphy is going to chat a little bit more about that. But it was a conversation that came up in Slack, and it seemed important enough and on enough people's minds that we wanted to highlight it here.
Yeah. Previously, when we have release candidates going out, there's a directory on repo.saltstack.com from where those release candidates can be downloaded. All of those release candidates were well out of date at this point. There was, for example, a release candidate for Salt Point release 3000. And generally, we usually leave them up until the next time there's another release candidate. But most people should have moved on to 3000 or 3000.1 or 3000.2 or 3 with the CVE releases. Given that those versions of release candidates had CVE issues, we decided that it was best to remove them and not give any malicious persons an ability to find a version of Salt which has this security problem. And when we go to release Sodium here in a short while, that will get refreshed with the new release candidates. And as is our norm, we'll do it for the most current versions of operating systems. So it'll be the latest Ubuntu 20.04, but we'll include 18.04 because there's still an awful lot around. We'll do Red Hat 8, but we'll also include Red Hat 7 because there's a lot of it around. But don't expect to see Ubuntu 16.04. We'll have Debian 10, but Debian 9's in old stable. So I would expect that we just have Debian 10 and the Raspberry equivalent, Raspberry 10, up there for it. So any questions on that?
Ralph, did you get your question answered about when the SEP is taking effect? Removing the old versions. That SEP is going to take effect on June 1st. All right, cool. And kind of piggybacking off both of those things is this topic about the new distribution support policy. This is the topic that Sebastian had requested. Sebastian, if you'd like to frame this up, you can. If not, somebody from the core team can. But
Yeah. Each time I deploy a new server, the first thing I want available on that server is Salt Minion, because this is the start to deploy anything else on the server. So having no easy way to deploy Salt on a server with a new distribution is a no-go to deploy that distribution for me. Yes, I know I can connect manually to the server and install via PIP or anything else, but in a real world, what I want is everything automated. So deploying server via Salt Cloud or whichever infrastructure as code tool you use, and having Salt Minion deployed. So my question is, how we can have Salt packages available as soon as possible after new distribution comes out. And the implicit question behind that is, how can the community help you to have that Salt packages available earlier?
I can offer a quick answer there. It's something I think about every time we do a release. So we release a release candidate, and we do internal testing to make sure that everything works. But the more testing we could get of the release candidate from the community, the better. Like the stabler Salt will be, and the quicker that we could get that release candidate released would be a huge help.
Yeah. So one other thing to note on that topic, we are in the process of moving our packaging to something that we call Salt Bin, which is the single binary distribution of Salt, or single directory in some cases. That should allow us to target newer versions of operating systems much sooner, because it's simplifying the entire process of packaging and managing dependencies mainly. So in Sodium, the Salt Bin packages will be available as an experimental state. So I expect in Magnesium, we will be in a stable state with those. And at that time, it should be a lot easier for us to support the newer versions sooner. So one thing I would suggest is maybe create a SEP with all of your ideas around this, and we can discuss how we can get this into like an automated pipeline with SaltBin. I think one of the main things we're going to need to tackle is like, how do we stay informed about newer versions coming out so that we can be on top of trying to get those packaged. David Murphy, do you have any thoughts on this at all?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question again, please?
So basically, the question is, how is it possible for us to target newer releases of operating systems as quickly as possible? Get a package built for those newer operating systems.
Yes, I think with SaltBin, what we shall be able to do is create a self-contained version which has fixes that are patched to allow for that operating system. Before we've got it back into the main version of Salt, and so that we can migrate and get up to speed a lot quicker for that operating system. For example, in the current Ubuntu 20.04, due to pressures of work and other issues, we were unable to get Python 3.8 support in earlier releases, and so it's having to wait till Sodium. We could have had though, if we had had those individual fixes rather than having to test on across the full spectrum of different OSs for all salt changes. With SaltBin, we'd be able to have special versions built just for that operating system and to build them quicker and cleaner. And so we can issue releases at a much faster pace with SaltBin than we can with the current system, where we're having to package and redo the general releases. The changes can go in faster into Salt, and so we'll be able to have refreshes up a lot faster with that system. The fact that we're self-contained means that we're not going to be bothered so much by the dependencies that are available on the operating systems. In the past, changes that we made in one operating system, we had to backport to older operating systems. With 3000.1 point release, last minute change for handling setup tools affected some of the older operating systems, and there was mad dash to backport support for that into things like Debian 8, which when we're in SaltBin, that will not be a problem at all, because there'll be self-contained builds for each operating system, and such we'll be able to move forward a lot quicker with each individual, if that helps. The biggest problems I've encountered with SaltBin so far is getting the right version of Python. Typically been looking at Python 3.7 onto older platforms, but with PyEnv, that makes things a lot easier. It's just some of the other work. There's some very old operating systems out there that we had to get Python 3.7 on to even do a build. There was a Python 3.1 was the official supported version. So you can imagine why we wanted to get 3.7 on. But once that was there, building with SaltBin was a piece of cake.
Okay, thank you. I think there are two items behind my question. First one is packaging, and we talked about it. There is another question that is also covered by SaltBin packages, which is new Python version support, Python or libraries, whatever. And effectively, SaltBin packages could solve both problems.
Yes, one of the reasons for wanting to move to the SaltBin, where everything is self-contained, including the Python version that is used, is to no longer have the issue of older dependency versions for things like ZeroMQ or PyCrypto or other very old versions that could be present on a system, so that we can ship with PyCrypto DOMX, later versions of ZeroMQ, an updated version of Python that we're not having to rely on the version of Python that is installed in the system. And so that we're essentially as self-contained as can be. And that means that we're able to have newer versions than those available on that operating system. So for example, I have, in other work that I've been doing, I've had a Python 3.7 version of a SaltBin minion running on a Red Hat 7 which is using Python 3.6. And we needed Python 3.7 because the platform that we're on only supported C and POSIX locale. And by using CPython, Python 3.7, we were able to get support for UTF-8 on that platform, which everything is using UTF-8 at this point, which it's a very old platform. That was the solution. And we had to run. It was basically a stripped out platform in a switch router. So everything is pretty clean. There's no locales really, except for POSIX and C on those. And that's the same for some containers as well. So we leveraged PEP 538 and 540 to get UTF-8 support in there. That would have been a nightmare to do with just regular Salt.
Okay, thank you. And do you know when on which version will be packages available for Ubuntu 20.4?
With Sodium, there will be regular packages for
Okay.
20.4, and the work is ongoing to have SaltBin versions as well. The SaltBin, we didn't want to make a big switch over, so we're providing the old style and the new style for evaluation. But the SaltBin packages have been being used in native Minion work on switch router vendors, and they've been working quite well. And it's very satisfactory to get things up and get fixes in very quickly and change stuff. As you can imagine, with some switch router vendors, there are interesting areas, and they had other demands for stuff that they wanted to be available through the SaltBin package as well. Things like Pi API being built in. And so having SaltBin allowed us that flexibility to have that there from the start.
Okay, thank you very much.
Cassandra, I think it's back to you.
Okay, well, that was the last formal agenda item. And I see a few questions have, let's see, is a change to single bin happening for Sodium? Have we discussed this upgrades to SSE? Question.
I don't actually have an answer for that. I don't know if anybody else
Neither
does.
I was just trying to get one.
Okay.
So the best I could say for SSE is it's probably better to reach out to support at saltstack.com for that.
Yeah. Or just ping me directly and I'll put you in touch with somebody.
Yeah. So I just want to state SaltBin is available up there on GitHub. It's open. You can go take a look at it. We're using PopBuild to build SaltBin packages at the moment, and PopBuild is available on GitLab, and it's open too. So the source code has been up there for a few months at this point, and any observations, contributions, gladly accepted. But it's all open source.
Does anyone know that there should be a SEP for SaltBin? I thought there was. Anyone happen to know?
I don't think that there is. We probably need one.
And sorry, while we're just checking on that, on the question of SSE, as David Murphy mentioned, so actually today in the current in-development version for SaltStack Enterprise, SaltBin is being used to create the packages that then get bundled into the installer. So SaltStack Enterprise uses GitLab, and the pipelines have all been set up to leverage SaltBin in that sense. And we are seeing significant improvements in the sense of bundling all the dependencies, etc., that we would need, and a great simplification of taking over the package. From a SaltStack Enterprise, I'm not entirely sure of the question, and Ralph, please feel free to reach out yourself or the team, or maybe we can cover this in the deep dive. If you are referencing the actual creation of the packages themselves or the installer. So in the current version of SaltStack Enterprise, I'm sorry, somebody, I think, so I am not sure who that is. I'm sorry, I'll connect with myself. We had for SaltStack Enterprise the notion of actually creating an all-in-one simple installer. That is not going to be ready for this release, but it will be ready for the next release. So we can definitely cover that in the deep dive. So in short, yes, SaltBin is being used for SaltStack Enterprise. And yes, there's also still the notion of the all-in-one simple installer that takes advantage of that. Hopefully that answered the question. And I see that there's an ask for a deeper dive, and that's probably a good thing, Cassandra, to do for the next open hour or so on, and cover that with the team and get a SEP out as well for it.
Yep. Yeah, we will follow up on that after this open hour. And this is the type of thing that we want out of the open hour, as a conversation comes up and it yields another conversation or topic or deep dive or clinic that kind of answers everybody's questions. So this is good. Any additional questions? Crickets. Okay. Normally when I ask if there are any additional questions, there's a few quiet minutes and somebody pipes up. So, but if not, we can always wrap the open hour early. We'll start figuring out how a deep dive looks for next week. Take a look at the SEP that we released, keep an eye out for the timelines.
I have a question.
Okay.
Did you hear about that snail that robbed the clock store?
I did not.
He took a lot of time.
But of course, snail jokes.
Yay. Twitch Prime linkable. Oh, we had a question from Twitch. How goes the work on improving the test suite? Somebody came across an entire feature today that's not being tested.
I can expand on that. So the plan was to have switched to PyTest by Sodium. We were close enough, but we are so close to the feature freeze that a couple of weeks ago we decided not to switch, even if everything was passing. That work also got delayed with our with us supporting the CVE clients and community. So the state that it is right now is there's one additional pull request that makes some more changes for PyTest. So you should be able to run PyTest for the test suite going forward. Sorry, going forward, there are, I believe, 2 or 3 test failures remaining that might get fixed before the release, but might not. That's not a priority right now. And to that extent, with PyTest, we will get an improved way of testing and addressing the problems that you have clarified in particular. We have identified performance issues with our test suite, and namely, we have marked some tests as being slow. That was an effort to make pull requests merged faster, so we get a passing or not passing status on a pull request way faster than we had a couple of weeks ago. And then once that's merged, that goes through the full test suite, and that allows us to still see if any of the slow tests got broken. The plan going forward is to actually address the slow tests. We don't want to maintain this scenario for too long, but these things take time. So that will involve seeing if the tests are still valid today. If they are, rewrite them, or come up with a faster way to test them on pull requests. So we are addressing the performance issues on the test suite, but our test suite these days is massive, and it takes time. But if you do find a gap on the test suite, please open an issue, or if you want to work on it and don't know how, feel free to reach out to us. Any help is more than welcomed, and if you have troubles setting things up and stuff like that, we are glad we gladly help you guys set up.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that the changes that we made to run only the fast tests for PRs and then run the slow tests for basically we're running them 4 times a day, the full test suite, as things get merged in. I think it's worth saying that that has significantly sped up our ability to merge PRs. So that's at least one positive thing that came out of that.
So I just saw another question that came in. I can comment on it. And Ralph, I think you're referring to 60 minutes. That's probably something that I had shared in one of our prior updates. So absolutely, I think we, as I had described before, the testing work group, that's collaboration across various community members, and Pedro's part of it and so on, are all making strides towards getting us towards that goal of running our suite in 60 minutes or less, that we had kind of declared as a goal for us as an organization and a community. So it's absolutely fair to raise that, and it's absolutely fair to expect that we're going to march towards it. I think the test suite that we have built, and for those who had not heard me say this before in a prior open hour, we should recognize that the team is working through a couple of improvements. There is the notion of our slow tests and fast tests, which really means tests that need to be refactored and improved, that Pedro talked about. That's one work item that we're going through. The second is we are recognizing that our test suite really has not been oriented or structured to be heavy on the unit test, separate between integration and functional tests, and so on. And so there is a broader refactoring that the community is needing to work through here, and it's predominantly been done through the core team and the testing work group. So that's another important emphasis side. The third is, our platform is very interdependent. And the reality is that the best of the projects are the ones in which people can contribute, their PR, have their PR tests succeed, and recognize that it's only in limited cases that the change that they've implemented has a broader side effect on the platform. And unfortunately, that's not the case for us today, which is why the POP architecture, of which SaltBin and others is an instantiation, is an attempt at creating extensions and allowing people to build pieces of functionality and extensions without needing to disrupt the whole platform or test against it. So that's a third initiative that helps us around the whole test posture and accelerating PRs and PR merges. So for example, the IDEM project or the Heist project, they're all being built on top of the POP modules, and therefore you can test against them in a little bit more fluid and rapid manner, recognizing that you don't have side effects. Now, is that pure and completely true? No, not necessarily, but at least it's a step that gets us there closer. Lastly, we have these work efforts around recognizing how to create tests that really touch all of the core modules. So we can at least be feeling safe or secure in knowing that whatever PR comes in, if the PR test passed, that when we run the full test suite and we've had a complete view around the core modules, that at least those don't break. And that's yet another activity that we're working through. So the ultimate result will be the ability for everybody to get their PR in, have a test going. It runs very fast. And frankly, even 60 minutes, some of the team members have challenged me, and I agreed with that 60 minutes is still even long. So we should aim even better than that. But I think that's a good milestone. If we get to 60 minutes, we can run it, and then you can iterate on your PR. That will be the result of us making all of those improvements.
Yeah, and I mean, right now with the fast tests in place, the slowest test suite is still Windows. And I just looked at one of the runs. It took an hour and 12 minutes. So we're pretty close now to that 60-minute mark, but I think we'll get better over time.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, Diwaz. And maybe a point for me to publicize that we did an internal port to master jam to try and accelerate all these PRs that we needed to port. And what that allowed us to do is to bring in many more developers who are less familiar with the open code and so on, and allow them to churn through porting these PRs with tests, etc. And one of the key things that enable us to do that is this notion of fast tests. So as and when we get to do the port to master party with the community, with everybody in the community, and we hope everybody will join in, and we'll have some virtual pizzas or whatever that may be, that we'll see the benefits of that. People will be able to pick off the board some PRs to port. They'll run them against the test that will run fast, with the exception of Windows, that probably, as Diwa said, that takes a little bit longer, but still, in a good time. And then we'll be able to improve from there. So sorry, Ralph, if that was a very long answer, but hopefully for those who are listening to this for the first time, either live or through the minutes or through the replay of this particular session, it gives you a full picture of all that we're doing behind the scenes to get to this better goal.
So I just want to say one more thing on the fast test thing. One other change that we made recently, which will affect the runtime of these tests, is so we're running the fast tests on every PR, and based on the files that are changing in the pull request, we're also potentially running a subset of the slow tests. So slow tests that are applicable to those files that you're changing will run. That shouldn't slow down things dramatically, but it will cause variances in times of the test runs for different PRs. All tests should be fast tests. That, for unit tests, that's definitely true. But with Salt, the nature of Salt, unfortunately, we need integration tests. So we need to test the entire pipeline. We need to test interactions between minions and masters, and we need to test on live systems to get a confidence level, the confidence level that we need. So yes, I agree that all tests should be fast tests when it comes to unit tests. We're not going to see a day where we can only do unit tests. And that's just due to the nature of Salt.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I've talked about several times on my, on the test clinic stream, is that, testing is a trade-off, right? You can write 0 tests and then they run perfectly fast. You never have to worry about their speed, but you also get 0 confidence as well. And then you can run tests that exercise every single line of code in every possible scenario that you could ever want. But you're going to spend, especially for Salt, probably like 6 weeks just running the tests, to say nothing of actually building them. So there's trade-offs, right? And there's a scale of doing these tests, from unit tests that are very narrow in focus and test kind of one thing in isolation versus, kind of on the other end, you get these end-to-end tests that are much slower, but also give you more confidence that the whole system together works. And, we've got to strike a balance in what we're testing and when we're testing it. And that's just something that we're working through. We're definitely a lot better than we have been, but there's still a long way to go as far as getting those fast tests fast, running on the PRs and plenty of them, and then running, our more full test suite. As a matter of fact, just one of the issues that was in the community, in the especially in the Windows group, we discovered there's some issues with the way M2 crypto and one of the Windows DLLs is getting installed or not. And so it can cause some funky issues there. So we've got to be able to test those. But that test is not like a half a second test. That's like a 30-second plus test to actually install the dependencies and run that. But that's the only way you're going to expose that issue. So there's a lot of things. Salt is a is a complex beast. There's a lot of pieces to it. So it's just necessary that we're going to have slow tests at some point in the cycle. But yeah, when it comes to PRs, I mean, most of the tests should be able to run really, really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, even in the fast tests that we've identified, I'm sure there are several hundred or maybe a couple thousand of those that could be refactored to be a lot faster than they are today.
Yeah. I mean, we've got tests that are running in under 100th of a second, and then we have tests that are running in like 1/10 of a second or a second or two. And so, you can reduce that time by an order of magnitude or two easily, just by changing what the test is actually testing, and how broad the test is. And so you can narrow things down a lot and isolate things and get much faster tests that are still robust and still cover the code, but are they're making more assumptions about what the world looks like. But so it's all trade-offs, and
Right.
we're working on finding that right
all
balance.
trade-offs, because when you start trying to narrow the focus of the test, you introduce the possibility that you end up not testing something that was getting tested before, and you don't realize it, and then bugs can slip by. So testing is something that will be ongoing. We're never going to get to a state where we're like, okay, we're done, the test suite's perfect, because that's just not what happens.
Yep.
It's really pleasing for me to hear that people are focused on tests and that we're concerning ourselves with the quality and the speed and the fact that we do or do not have tests. Are there IRC questions that need to be addressed?
I do not see any IRC questions.
Just talking about, there looks like there's some discussion about Slack or IRC or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the bridge
in
isn't working.
Oh, okay.
It looks like it's only working. It's not working one way. So I'm seeing messages come in. It just doesn't seem like there's messages going out from Slack.
Is this due to the Slack discontinuing support for bridges, or did we already resolve that?
That's the current theory there. We haven't actually cut over to using the Matrix bridge or anything, but it looks like we may want to do that soon. I don't remember that we are having any issues with messages getting dropped using the Matrix bridge. What we were seeing sometimes, though, was like a multiple minute lag. And then, of course, the issue with the threads, that was just threading from Slack to IRC over that bridge was pretty awful. Kind of one of the worst things I've ever seen. So we definitely need to work on that and make sure that's done well.
Okay. All right, then Imran says we're testing employee names, not the bridge itself. But yeah, definitely before the support completely goes away, we do need to make sure that that IRC community is staying connected. That's one thing that, from a communication standpoint, one thing I've been trying to do is as I post an IRC, before I post anything, I'm trying to have a link to send everybody to, whether it's on the wiki or a blog or something, so I can just put a 2-sentence, hey, this is what's going on, more details at this link. Since IRC doesn't lend itself to very long messages and it has no formatting. Well, if nobody else has anything else to add, thank you all for joining us. We will see you again next week. I dropped in the general Slack the rest of our Twitch stream so you can find out what it is that we're streaming and when. Like I said, meetups are back up and running starting next week. And we're going to have a mix of internal employees and some community members presenting their talks. So keep an eye out for that. All those events are going to be on community.saltstack.com. And on Mondays, there will start being a like what's happening this week post that I'll put in that announcements channel on Slack so you can see what events are happening, what major news there is, and just be up to date that way. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. And as always, reach out to us if you have any questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.